So, the Bayeux Tapestry. Do we swallow it? Well, parts of it, yes. Other parts, clearly not. We remember all the time what the intention was behind it, to prove that William was right and that Harold was wrong. We also know, from our other studies of history, that the actual conquest of England took a good deal longer than a few hours slogging it out on a hillside in Sussex. Now consider the question of the result of all this. Assuming that the Bayeux Tapestry has done its job, Hastings is over, the English have run away, William has been crowned king. Incidentally, they don't show you the coronation of William in the Bayeux Tapestry. I suppose it's possible that it would have been the very final panel in the Bayeux Tapestry, but we know that the last bit of it has been destroyed. Did that last bit contain the coronation of William, which would have been the perfect dramatic finale to the whole thing? Harold commits a crime, he is a perjurer, he loses, he is punished, he is killed, and William, as God's representative, is crowned as king, and everybody lives happily ever after. Well, we've lost it, so we don't know. But did the English accept Hastings? Did they say, in effect, well, OK, William, the best side won, and let's try and make the best of it from now on, shall we? Common sense would tell you that that didn't happen. Therefore, did it mean that England, for the rest of William's reign, all 21 years of it, was in a state of permanent revolt? Common sense tells you that that's unlikely as well. You very rarely find blacks and whites in history. It's all a series of greys. A bit of this and a bit of that. What we do know for sure is that William was now the master of an entire country, and he physically owned it. He was the owner. He was the physical owner, the legal owner, the actual owner, the church recognised owner. Every way you care to look at it, William owned. Like you own your house or you own your bicycle, William owned England, and he could do with it as he liked, and he proceeded to do so. Of course, he now had to run it. He couldn't run it himself, and he had to have his Norman barons. The ones who had been brave enough or rash enough to risk all to follow him now could enjoy the rich pickings in England as William shared them out. Now, the Saxon nobility had very obligingly killed a lot of themselves off at the Battle of Stamford Bridge and the Battle of Hastings. So William, to a certain extent, had a fairly clear run when it came to allocating land. Of course, these Saxons left young boys as their heir, and sadly many of them got pushed on one side as the Norman barons took over the Saxons' land. It turned out to be the biggest shift of land ownership pretty well in English history up to that time. The only comparable shift in land ownership came 400 or 500 years later with the dissolution of the monasteries, which is quite an epic in itself. What did ordinary people think about the Norman conquest? Well, poor souls, it didn't really matter what they thought about it. There was certainly nothing they could do about it. But whether they could or not, we don't really know, because they couldn't read and they couldn't write. And they didn't write anything down, so we don't know. We can just make an intelligent guess. Life was hard. It had always been hard. It was going to carry on being hard. You would still have to pay taxes. A landlord was a landlord. The English weather didn't change. So in many, many ways, life hadn't changed all that much for the English, except that their landlord now spoke a different language and possibly couldn't understand theirs. What about the winners? What happened to them? You ask yourself for a minute. It's wonderful to have had the adventure, to have risked all, to have won the battle, to be given countless estates. I mean, some of the estates Norman barons came into possession ran into the hundreds, all over the place. What did they know about these new lands? Did they even know where they were? How many of them had visited England before? How many of them knew anything about English? How many of them spoke English? How many of them knew anything about English law, English customs, English anything? What do they know about the English church? What do they know about communications in England? And all this, remember, has to be seen to, and they've still got their estates in Normandy. They can't leave them alone for long. They can't neglect them, because if they do, there are going to be some naughty neighbours sooner or later who are going to take advantage of their absence. So these Norman barons have to commute regularly. William commuted regularly between England and Normandy. So the Norman barons had an awful lot to learn. And that wasn't the end of it either, because England, remember, had neighbours. Was the Kingdom of Norway going to accept the defeat at Stamford Bridge? Would they not come back for a revenge expedition? Would Denmark have another crack at putting a Danish king on the English throne? Would Scotland start their antics again? After all, England had a broken government, it had a decimated nobility, it had a whole year of war, it had 2 invasions. If ever there was a chance for the King of Scotland to cause trouble, this was it. So you think of all those problems that existed and all the disadvantages that the Norman barons would have to deal with. It sometimes makes you wonder why the Normans thought it was worth all the trouble in the first place.